What if everything you believed about the most recognizable symbol in human history was incomplete? What if the cross, worn by millions, displayed in churches worldwide, carved into gravestones across centuries, meant something far more profound than you were ever taught? This is the story of Ryan Bill, a man who offered shelter to a stranger on a freezing Chicago night, only to discover that his guest wasn't from this world. And what this being revealed about the cross, about sacrifice, about the true nature of salvation, shattered every religious certainty Ryan had built his life upon. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about faith, redemption, and humanity's place in a universe far more mysterious than any scripture ever described. Now, let's go back to the night Ryan's understanding of everything changed. Chicago in February was a study in hostility. The kind of cold that didn't just chill your body but seemed to freeze your thoughts mid-formation, making everything slow and difficult and painful. Ryan Bill stood at the window of his third-floor apartment in Pilsen, watching snow fall through the orange glow of streetlights, each flake a small act of violence against anyone foolish enough to be outside. It was 11:47 p.m. He should have been asleep. He had to be at the architecture firm by 7, had a presentation for a client at 9, and had approximately 6 hours to rest before the performance began again. But sleep has become difficult lately. Not because of work stress, though there was plenty of that. Not because of the divorce, though that wound was still fresh enough to bleed when he prodded it. But because of the questions, the ones that had started small, manageable, the kind you could ignore during daylight hours when you were busy with CAD drawings and client meetings and the mechanical necessities of staying employed. But at night, alone in an apartment that still felt too empty, even though Melissa had been gone for 8 months, the questions grew louder. What was the point? Not in the dramatic suicidal sense. Just in the practical, architectural sense that Ryan's mind naturally gravitated toward. What was the structural purpose of a life spent designing buildings other people would inhabit, earning money to pay for shelter he barely occupied, maintaining relationships that dissolved the moment they required actual vulnerability? Ryan had been raised Catholic. Not the casual Christmas and Easter variety, but the full immersion. Catholic elementary school, where Sister Margaret had rapped his knuckles with a ruler for asking why God needed money if he created everything. Catholic high school, where Father Tom had explained that questioning doctrine was the devil's favorite tool. Catholic university, where he'd finally stopped going to Mass because the cognitive dissonance between God is love and most of humanity is going to hell had become too exhausting to navigate. He'd kept the cross, though. A small silver one his grandmother had given him at his confirmation, worn on a chain around his neck for 20 years. He wasn't sure why he still wore it. Habit, maybe. Or insurance. The Pascal's wager approach to jewelry. If God existed and cared about symbols, at least Ryan was covered. If God didn't exist, it was just a piece of metal that reminded him of his grandmother, who'd been the only person in his family who'd never tried to force her faith down his throat. She'd just lived it. Quietly. Feeding people who showed up at her door. Listening to neighbors who needed someone to hear them, praying in a way that seemed less like begging and more like breathing. She died 3 years ago, and Ryan had cried at her funeral in a way he hadn't cried at his own wedding, because his grandmother had been real, and most of his life, he was realizing, had been performance. The marriage to Melissa had been a performance, playing the role of husband without ever actually letting her see the questions, the doubts, the parts of him that didn't fit the narrative of successful architect with his life together. She'd left because she'd finally realized she was married to a facade. "I don't know who you are," she'd said the night she packed her bags. "I don't think you know who you are, and I can't keep pretending that's enough." She'd been right. Ryan didn't know who he was. He knew who he was supposed to be. Catholic, architect, husband, eventually father. But the supposed to be had collapsed, and underneath it was just a 36-year-old man standing at a window at midnight, watching snow fall, wondering what the point was. Movement caught his eye. Down on the street, barely visible through the snow, someone was walking. Not the hurried walk of someone trying to get inside, but a slow, wandering walk. The walk of someone who was lost. Or dying. Ryan watched for another moment, then grabbed his coat. He didn't think about it. Didn't weigh the risks. Didn't consider that this was Chicago. That helping strangers at midnight was how people ended up on the news. He just moved. Down 3 flights of stairs, out into cold so sharp it felt like inhaling broken glass, across the street to where the figure had stopped under a streetlight. It was a man. At least, It appeared to be a man. Tall, maybe 6'3", wearing clothes that were completely inadequate for the weather. A thin jacket, no hat, no gloves. And he was just standing there, looking up at the falling snow as if he'd never seen it before. "Hey," Ryan called out, his voice swallowed by wind. "You okay?" The man turned, and Ryan saw his face. Something was wrong. Not obviously wrong. Not horror movie wrong. Just off. The proportions were almost right, but not quite. Eyes slightly too large. Nose slightly too narrow. Mouth that didn't quite match the rest of the face, as if someone had assembled a human from memory rather than a blueprint. And the eyes. Even in the dim streetlight, even through falling snow, Ryan could see they were wrong. Too dark. Too reflective. Like looking at polished stone instead of living tissue. "I am not okay," the man said, and his voice was wrong too. Flat, accentless, like someone speaking English phonetically without understanding the music of it. "You need to get inside," Ryan said. "You'll freeze out here. I do not understand freezing." Ryan moved closer, and that's when he saw the man was shaking. Not shivering. Shaking. Like something inside him was malfunctioning. "Come on," Ryan said, making a decision that his rational mind was already questioning. "My apartment's right there. You can warm up, and we'll figure out what to do." The man looked at him with those impossible eyes. "You would shelter me? Without knowing what I am? I know you're someone who's going to die if you stay out here," Ryan said. "That's enough." Something flickered across the man's face. Not quite a smile, but something like recognition. "Your species surprises me sometimes," the man said quietly. "My species?" But the man's legs buckled, and Ryan caught him before he hit the pavement. He was lighter than he should have been. Tall but weighing maybe 140 pounds, as if his bones were hollow like a bird's. Ryan half-carried, half-dragged him across the street, up 3 flights of stairs, into the apartment that suddenly felt very small and very isolated. He deposited the man on the couch and turned on the space heater, then went to make tea because that's what his grandmother would have done. When he came back, the man was sitting upright, no longer shaking, looking around the apartment with an expression of intense curiosity. "You live here alone," the man said. Not a question. "Yeah, recently alone. Your partner left." "My wife." "And how do you know that?" The man gestured vaguely at the apartment. "The space is arranged for 2 people, but only one person's energy occupies it. And you wear pain like a coat. Loss. Confusion. Questions you cannot answer." Ryan set the tea down on the coffee table, suddenly very aware that he'd just brought a complete stranger into his home. "Who are you?" The man looked at him for a long moment. "My name would be unpronounceable to you, but you may call me Kale. And I am not from your world, Ryan Bill." Ryan's hand went instinctively to the cross around his neck. "That's not possible. And yet, here I am. You're hypothermic. Confused. I should call an ambulance. They would not know what to do with me. My biology is not compatible with your medical understanding." Ryan sat down heavily in the chair across from the couch. "This isn't real. I'm having a breakdown. The divorce, the stress, I'm finally cracking." Kale tilted his head in that way that seemed almost human but wasn't quite. "You are not cracking. You are waking up. And I am here because you were ready." "Ready for what?" "To understand. To see beyond the stories you were told. To learn what the cross you wear actually means." Ryan's hand tightened around the silver cross. "How do you know about this?" "Because I was there," Kale said simply. "Not at the crucifixion itself, but in the aftermath. When your species was trying to understand what had happened. When the symbol was being born. When the truth was being translated into mythology." Ryan stood up, his heart hammering. "You need to leave. I don't know what you are, what you want, but you need to leave." "I cannot leave yet," Kale said, and there was something like sadness in his voice. "My vessel is damaged. I crashed 3 days ago, north of your city. I have been walking, trying to reach a location where I can signal for retrieval, but the cold affects me in ways I did not anticipate. If you had not found me, I would have ceased functioning within the hour." "Crashed? You're saying you crashed a spaceship?" "That is your term for it, yes." Ryan laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "This is insane. You're insane. I'm insane." "You are not insane, Ryan Bill. You are a man who stopped believing in the God you were taught, but never stopped searching for truth. You wear a cross not because you believe in the doctrine, but because you hope there is something real beneath the mythology. And I am here to tell you that there is. But it is not what you were taught. Ryan sat back down, his legs unable to hold him. What are you talking about? Cale leaned forward, and in the lamplight, Ryan could see more clearly how wrong he looked. The skin was too smooth. The joints that bent at slightly incorrect angles. The eyes that reflected light like an animal's. The cross is not a symbol of sacrifice to appease an angry God, Cale said quietly. It is a symbol of transformation, of consciousness choosing to experience limitation in order to understand expansion, of the infinite deliberately fragmenting itself so it could know itself through relationships. And the being you call Jesus understood this. He was trying to show your species something profound. But the message was mistranslated. Turned into religion, into control, into fear. Ryan felt something cracking open in his chest. How do you know this? Because my species has been observing yours for thousands of your years. We have watched you evolve, watched you create meaning, watched you build religions around experiences you did not have the framework to understand. And we have watched the cross become both your greatest symbol of hope and your greatest tool of oppression. Cale reached out slowly, and Ryan didn't pull away as those strange fingers touched the silver cross hanging against his chest. This symbol holds more truth than you know, Cale said. But also more distortion. And if you are willing, if you are ready, I will show you what it really means. Not the version the church taught you, but the version that was lost. The version that could change everything. Ryan looked into those impossible eyes and saw something he hadn't expected. Compassion. This being, this stranger from another world, was looking at him with more genuine care than most humans had shown him in years. Show me, Ryan whispered. And Cale smiled, a gesture that looked almost human. Then we begin. If you've ever questioned what you were taught about faith, about sacrifice, about the symbols you were told were sacred, drop a comment. Because what Cale revealed to Ryan will change how you see the cross forever. Cale stood and moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered city with an expression Ryan couldn't read. Your species has a complicated relationship with suffering, Cale said. You glorify it, build religions around it. Teach your children that pain is noble, that sacrifice is the highest virtue, that the more you suffer, the more worthy you become. Ryan joined him at the window, still not entirely convinced this was real. That's what Christianity teaches, that Jesus suffered for our sins, that his sacrifice saved us. And what does that mean to you? Cale asked. Saved you from what? Ryan thought about the catechism classes, the sermons, the endless explanations that had never quite made sense. From hell, from eternal damnation, from the consequences of original sin. And you believe this? I don't know what I believe anymore. Cale turned to face him, and Ryan saw something like approval in those strange eyes. That is the beginning of wisdom, not knowing. Being willing to admit that the stories you were told might be incomplete. So tell me the complete story, Ryan said. You said you were there, in the aftermath. What really happened? Cale moved back to the couch, settling into it in a way that looked uncomfortable but apparently wasn't. What happened is that a human being, a man you called Jesus, achieved a level of consciousness that most of your species has not yet reached. He understood something fundamental about the nature of reality, about the relationship between consciousness and physical form, about the illusion of separation. He was enlightened, Ryan said, like Buddha. Similar, but not identical. Buddha taught detachment from suffering. Jesus taught transformation through suffering. Not because suffering is noble, but because it is the fastest way to break the illusion of the separate self. Ryan sat down, his architect's mind trying to find the structure in what Cale was saying. I don't understand. You are not Ryan Bill, Cale said simply. Not fundamentally. Ryan Bill is a role you are playing, a character you are inhabiting, a temporary expression of something far larger. You are consciousness itself, infinite and eternal, temporarily focused through the lens of a human life. But you have forgotten this. You believe you are the character. You believe you are the role, and that belief creates suffering. Ryan felt something shifting in his chest, like a door opening onto a room he'd never known existed. And Jesus knew this? Jesus remembered this. He woke up from the dream of separation, and he tried to teach others how to do the same. But the teaching was difficult. Your species was not ready. So he demonstrated it instead. The crucifixion. Yes, but not in the way you were taught. Cale stood and moved to the center of the room, and as he did, the air seemed to shimmer. Ryan blinked, and suddenly there were images. Not on a screen. Not projected. Just hanging in the air like windows into another time. He saw a hill. 3 crosses. A man dying in the center. But the image was different from every painting, every movie, every depiction Ryan had ever seen. There was no agony on the man's face. No suffering. Just profound peace. And around him, invisible to the soldiers and the crowd, there was light. Not physical light, but something else. A radiance that seemed to emanate from the dying man's consciousness itself. "What am I seeing?" Ryan whispered. "You are seeing what actually happened," Cale said. "Not the mythology, not the religious interpretation, but the event itself, as my species observed it." "Your species was there?" "We have always been here, Ryan, watching, observing, occasionally intervening when the timeline requires it. And the crucifixion was a moment we observed very carefully, because we knew it would shape your species' development for millennia." Ryan watched as the man on the cross spoke, though he couldn't hear the words. "What is he saying?" "He is saying it is finished, but not in the way your scriptures interpret it. He is not saying his suffering is finished. He is saying the demonstration is finished. He has shown what he came to show. That consciousness can transcend physical form. That death is not the end. That the body is temporary, but awareness is eternal." The image shifted, and Ryan saw the moment of death. But it wasn't death. It was a transformation. The man's body went still, but something else happened. The light that had been emanating from him suddenly expanded, exploding outward in a wave that passed through everyone present. Soldiers, mourners, observers, all of them are touched by this wave of consciousness. "What was that?" Ryan asked. "That was the actual salvation," Cale said quietly. "Not a transaction where Jesus paid a debt to an angry God, but a transmission, a frequency shift. He raised the collective consciousness of everyone present, showed them directly that they were not separate from the divine, that they were expressions of it. And that transmission rippled outward, affecting thousands, then millions, then billions over the centuries." The images faded, and Ryan was left staring at Cale, his mind reeling. "So the cross isn't about sacrifice?" "The cross is about transformation," Cale corrected. "About consciousness choosing to experience the ultimate limitation, physical death, in order to demonstrate that consciousness transcends limitation. It is a symbol of the infinite deliberately fragmenting itself into the finite, and then remembering its infinite nature. That is what Jesus was showing. That is what the cross actually represents." Ryan's hand went to the silver cross around his neck, feeling its weight differently now. "But the church teaches that we're sinners, that we need to be saved, that Jesus died because we're fundamentally broken. And that teaching has caused immeasurable suffering," Cale said, and for the first time, Ryan heard something like anger in his voice. "Your species is not broken. You are not sinners requiring salvation. You are consciousness itself, temporarily experiencing limitations in order to know itself more fully. You are divine beings having a human experience, not human beings hoping to become divine. Then why do we suffer? Why is there so much pain? Because you have forgotten who you are. Because you believe the illusion of separation. Because you think you are small, powerless, separate from the source of all creation. And that belief creates the experience of suffering." Cale moved closer, and Ryan saw compassion in those alien eyes. "Jesus was trying to show you that suffering is optional. Not pain. Pain is part of physical existence. But suffering, the mental and emotional anguish that comes from believing you are separate, alone, unworthy, that is optional. That is what happens when you forget your true nature. And the cross is supposed to remind us? The cross is supposed to show you the pattern. Consciousness descending into matter, experiencing limitations, appearing to die, and then transcending, transforming, rising again. That is not just Jesus' story, that is every human story. You descend into physical form, you forget who you are, you suffer, and then you remember. You wake up, you rise. That is the resurrection. Not a one-time historical event, but a process every conscious being goes through. Ryan felt tears starting, hot and unexpected. I was taught that I was broken, that I needed to be fixed, that I was born sinful and could only be saved through belief in Jesus' sacrifice. And that teaching has kept you small, Cale said gently, has kept you afraid, has kept you from remembering your true nature. You are not broken, Ryan Bill. You are consciousness itself, temporarily experiencing the illusion of separation. And the cross you wear is not a reminder of your unworthiness. It is a reminder of your true nature. Infinite consciousness choosing to experience limitation, and then transcending it. Ryan pulled the cross over his head, holding it in his palm, looking at it with new eyes. My grandmother gave me this. She never talked about sin. She just loved people, fed them, listened to them. She lived like Jesus, not like the church. Your grandmother understood, Cale said. Perhaps not intellectually, but in her being. She knew that love is the only truth, that service is the highest expression of consciousness, that the cross is not about judgment, but about transformation. Why are you telling me this? Ryan asked. Why did you crash here? Why did I find you? There are no accidents, Cale said. You found me because you were ready, because you had stopped believing the old stories, but hadn't yet found the new truth, because you were asking questions, and the universe responds to questions. I crashed because my vessel malfunctioned, yes. But I was guided to this location, to this city, to this moment, because you needed to hear this, and because you will share it. Share it? Who's going to believe me? The ones who are ready will believe you. The ones who are still asleep will dismiss you. But that is not your concern. Your concern is simply to share what you have learned, to tell the truth about the cross, to help others remember that they are not broken, not sinful, not separate. They are consciousness itself, temporarily experiencing human form. Ryan looked at the cross in his hand, feeling its weight, its history, its meaning shifting. I don't know how to do that. You do not need to know how. You simply need to be willing. The universe will orchestrate the rest. Cale stood, and Ryan noticed he was no longer shaking, no longer appearing weak. My vessel is repairing itself. I will be able to leave soon, but before I go, I want to show you one more thing. What? The truth about who you are. Not the story, not the belief, but the direct experience. Cale reached out, and Ryan didn't pull away as those strange fingers touched his forehead. And suddenly, Ryan wasn't in his apartment anymore. He was everywhere. He was the snow falling outside. He was the streetlight glowing. He was the building, the city, the planet. He was every person sleeping in every apartment. He was every thought, every dream, every moment of consciousness happening simultaneously. He was infinite. He was eternal. He was everything. And in that moment he understood. He wasn't Ryan Bill. Ryan Bill was something he was experiencing. But he, the awareness experiencing Ryan Bill, was consciousness itself. Infinite, eternal, divine. The experience ended, and Ryan gasped, back in his body, back in his apartment, tears streaming down his face. What was that? That was you, Cale said simply. Your true nature. What you are beneath the role, beneath the character, beneath the story of Ryan Bill. That is what Jesus was trying to show people. That is what the cross represents. The infinite choosing to experience the finite, and then remembering its infinite nature. Ryan looked at the cross in his hand, and he understood. It wasn't a symbol of his brokenness. It wasn't a reminder of his sin. It was a map, a blueprint, an architectural drawing of consciousness itself, descending into matter, experiencing limitations, and then rising again, transformed, awakened, whole. Thank you, Ryan whispered. Thank you for sheltering me, Cale replied. For seeing a stranger and offering help without knowing what I was. That is the consciousness Jesus was teaching. That is the love the cross represents. Not sacrifice to appease an angry God, but service as the natural expression of remembering we are all one. And in that moment, Ryan Bill, architect, divorced, lost, questioning, understood more about faith than 36 years of Catholic education had ever taught him. Subscribe if this is resonating with you. Because what Ryan discovered in the days that followed will show you exactly what it means to live from the truth of the cross. Cale stayed for 3 more days. Not because his vessel wasn't repaired, Ryan suspected, but because there was more to teach, more to show, more to help Ryan understand before he left. They talked for hours, sitting in Ryan's small apartment while snow continued to fall outside, covering Chicago in white silence. Cale explained things Ryan had never thought to question. When did religion become about control instead of liberation? Why the church had emphasized sin instead of divinity? Why the cross had been turned into a weapon instead of remaining a symbol of transformation? Your species has a tendency to take profound truths and weaponize them, Cale said on the second night, both of them sitting at Ryan's small kitchen table, drinking tea that Cale didn't actually need but consumed anyway out of what seemed like politeness. The cross was meant to liberate, to show that consciousness transcends physical death, to demonstrate that you are not your body, not your circumstances, not your suffering, but within a few centuries, it had been turned into a tool of oppression. Believe this or go to hell. Submit to this authority or be damned. Suffer now and be rewarded later. All distortions of the original message. Ryan thought about the Catholic school, the rulers across knuckles, the shame for asking questions. Why did it get distorted? H-rate. Because institutions require control. And the truth of the cross is that you do not need an institution. You do not need a priest or a church or a ritual. You only need to remember who you are. And that remembering threatens every power structure built on the premise that you are small, broken, and need external salvation. So the church deliberately changed the message? Not deliberately in most cases. Most religious leaders believe what they teach. But the message was filtered through human consciousness that was not yet ready to receive it fully. Jesus taught that the kingdom of heaven is within you, that you and the Father are one, that you can do everything he did and more. But that message was too radical, too threatening. So it was softened, made safer, turned into something that required belief instead of direct experience. Ryan looked at the cross, lying on the table between them, the silver catching lamplight. My grandmother never talked about belief. She just lived it. She fed people. She listened. She loved without conditions. Your grandmother understood the true message, Cale said. Perhaps not intellectually, but in her being. She knew that love is not a transaction. That service is not about earning heaven. That the cross is not about judgment but about recognizing the divine in everyone. I miss her, Ryan said quietly. She is not gone. Ryan looked up sharply. What? Consciousness does not die, Ryan. Only bodies die. The awareness that you knew as your grandmother, the essence of who she was, that did not end. It transitioned. It returned to the source, but it is still accessible to you. You're saying I can talk to her? Not in the way you mean. She is no longer focused through a physical form. She is no longer experiencing linear time. But the love you shared, the connection you had, that exists in the field of consciousness that connects all things. And when you quiet your mind, when you go deep into meditation or prayer, or simply into the silence of your own being, you can feel that connection. Ryan felt something breaking open in his chest. How? Cale reached across the table and placed his hand over Ryan's heart. Close your eyes. Breathe. Feel for the presence of love. Not as a memory, not as a thought, but as a living frequency. Your grandmother's consciousness, her essence, it is woven into the fabric of reality. And you can access it anytime you choose. Ryan closed his eyes, feeling foolish, feeling desperate, feeling like a child reaching for something he couldn't name. And then he felt it. Not a voice. Not a vision. Just a presence. A warmth. A sense of being held by something vast and loving. And within that presence, he felt his grandmother. Not as a separate being, but as a frequency, a vibration, a love that had never ended. Tears streamed down his face. She's here, he whispered. She has always been here, Cale said gently. You simply forgot how to feel her. But now you remember, and you will never lose that connection again. Cale. Ryan opened his eyes, and the apartment looked different, brighter, more alive, as if the walls themselves were breathing. What's happening to me? You are waking up, Cale said. You are beginning to see reality as it actually is, not as you were taught to perceive it. You are remembering that consciousness is primary, that matter is secondary, that everything you see is consciousness expressing itself in form. Ryan looked at his hands, and for a moment, he could see through them. Not physically, but he could sense the space between atoms, the energy vibrating, the consciousness animating what appeared to be solid flesh. This is what Jesus saw, Ryan said, understanding flooding through him. Yes, he saw that physical reality is not solid, that it is consciousness vibrating at different frequencies, that the body is temporary but awareness is eternal. And he tried to teach this, but the teaching was too advanced, so he demonstrated it instead. He showed that consciousness can transcend physical form, that death is not the end, that the cross, the intersection of spirit and matter, is not a place of suffering but a place of transformation. Ryan stood and moved to the window, looking out at Chicago, at the buildings he'd spent his career designing, at the city full of people who believed they were separate, alone, struggling. How many people know this? He asked. More than you think. Fewer than there should be. Your species is at a critical point. You are either going to wake up collectively, or you are going to destroy yourselves. And the outcome depends on how many individuals like you remember the truth. How many people stop believing the distorted message and start living the real one. What's the real message? Cale joined him at the window, and in the reflection, Ryan could see both of them, human and alien, standing side by side. The real message is that you are not broken. You are not sinful. You are not separate from the divine. You are the divine, temporarily experiencing limitation in order to know itself more fully. And the cross is not a symbol of your unworthiness. It is a symbol of your true nature. Consciousness choosing to descend into matter, to experience the illusion of separation, and then to rise again, transformed, awakened, whole. And I'm supposed to share this? If you choose, you are not obligated. But you asked for truth, and truth was given to you. And when truth is given, there is a natural impulse to share it. Not because you must, but because you cannot help it. Because once you see, you want others to see. Once you remember, you want others to remember. Ryan thought about his life. The architecture firm. The designs he created for buildings that would outlast him. The marriage that had failed because he'd never let Melissa see who he really was. The faith he'd abandoned because it had never made sense. All of it suddenly felt like preparation, like everything had been leading to this moment, to this understanding, to this choice. I'll share it, Ryan said. I don't know how. I don't know who will listen. But I'll share it. Cale placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder, and Ryan felt warmth radiating from the touch. Then you are fulfilling your purpose. Not the purpose the church told you, not the purpose society expected, but the purpose you chose before you incarnated into this life. To wake up, to remember, and to help others do the same. You're leaving soon, aren't you? Yes, my vessel is repaired. My people are coming to retrieve me. But before I go, I want to give you something. Cale reached into his jacket and pulled out a small object. It looked like a stone, smooth and dark, but it pulsed with a faint inner light. What is it? A reminder. When you hold it, you will be able to access the state of consciousness I showed you, the experience of your true nature. It will help you when doubt comes, when fear arises, when the old programming tries to reassert itself. Hold this and remember who you are. Ryan took the stone, and the moment it touched his palm, he felt it. The expansion, the sense of being everything and nothing simultaneously. The peace that transcended understanding. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for sheltering me, Cale replied. For seeing a stranger and offering help. For being willing to question everything you were taught. For choosing truth over comfort. You are exactly what your species needs right now. And there are thousands more like you, waking up, remembering, choosing to live from the truth of the cross instead of the distortion. That night, Ryan lay in bed holding the stone, feeling its pulse, feeling the connection to something vast and loving. And he understood. The cross wasn't about Jesus dying for his sins. It was about consciousness choosing to experience limitation, and then transcending it. It was about the infinite, fragmenting itself into the finite, and then remembering its infinite nature. It was about every human being's journey, descending into matter, forgetting who they are, suffering, and then waking up, remembering, rising, transformed. The cross was a map. And Ryan Bill, architect, had finally learned to read it. If you've ever felt like the religion you were taught didn't match the truth you felt inside, comment below, because what Ryan did next will show you how to live from the real message of the cross. KL left on the fourth morning. Ryan woke to find him standing at the window, looking out at a city washed clean by snow, the sun rising over Lake Michigan in shades of gold and pink. "They are here," KL said without turning around. Ryan joined him at the window, and he saw it. A light in the sky, stationary, too bright to be a star, too still to be a plane. "That's them?" "Yes. I will go to the lake. They will retrieve me there, and you will continue the work we began." Ryan felt a surprising surge of grief. This being, this stranger from another world, had shown him more truth in 4 days than 36 years of living had revealed. "Will I see you again?" "Perhaps, if you need to, if the work requires it. But you do not need me, Ryan. Everything I showed you is already inside you. You simply needed someone to help you remember." Cale turned, and in the morning light he looked even less human than before. The proportions are too elongated. The eyes are too large. The skin is too smooth. But the expression was pure compassion. "Before I go, I want to show you one more thing. The blueprint. The architecture of awakening. You are an architect, yes? You understand structures, patterns, designs. So I will show you the design of consciousness itself." Cale raised his hand, and the air shimmered. Images formed, not projected but somehow present, three-dimensional and vivid. Ryan saw a cross, but not the simple 2-bar cross he'd worn around his neck. This was complex, multi-dimensional, geometric. "This is the actual structure," Cale said. "Not the simplified symbol, but the pattern it represents. The vertical axis is consciousness descending into matter, spirit becoming form, the infinite choosing to experience the finite. And the horizontal axis is time. The linear experience of past, present, future. Where these two axes intersect, that is incarnation. That is you. That is every human being. Consciousness intersects with time, creating the experience of individual existence." Ryan stared at the image, his architect's mind recognizing the elegance of the design. "It's beautiful. It is the fundamental pattern of creation." And Jesus understood this. He knew that the cross was not just a method of execution. It was a symbol of the structure of reality itself, consciousness and time intersecting, spirit and matter meeting, the infinite and the finite dancing together. The image shifted, and Ryan saw the cross rotating, revealing more dimensions. But there is more. The cross is not two-dimensional. It is multidimensional. There are other axes you cannot see with physical eyes. The axis of choice, the axis of love, the axis of awareness. All of them intersect at the point of you. And when you understand this, when you see the full architecture, you realize that you are not a victim of circumstances. You are the creator of your experience. You are consciousness itself, choosing to focus through this particular intersection of time and space and matter. Ryan felt his mind expanding, trying to hold the complexity of what he was seeing. So when Jesus said, "Take up your cross and follow me," he wasn't talking about suffering. He was talking about accepting the full architecture of incarnation, about embracing the intersection of spirit and matter, about choosing to be fully present at the point where consciousness meets time. That is what it means to take up your cross, not to suffer, but to be fully alive, fully aware, fully present to the miracle of existence. The images faded, and Ryan was left staring at Cale, his understanding of everything shifting. The church got it all wrong. The church preserved what it could understand. But yes, much was lost, much was distorted. The cross became about death instead of life, about suffering instead of transformation, about sin instead of divinity. And that distortion has caused immeasurable pain. How do I fix it? How do I help people understand the real meaning? You do not fix it. You simply live it. You embody the truth. You become the demonstration. just as Jesus did. He did not write books. He did not create an institution. He simply lived from the truth of who he was. And that living was so powerful, so transformative, that it changed the world. You do the same. You live from the truth of the cross. You remember that you are consciousness itself, temporarily experiencing human form, and that remembering will affect everyone you encounter. Cale moved toward the door, and Ryan followed. I don't know if I can do this. You are already doing it. The moment you sheltered me, you were living the truth of the cross. The moment you chose compassion over fear, service over self-protection, you were embodying the message. You do not need to become something you are not. You simply need to remember what you are. They walked down the 3 flights of stairs in silence, out into the cold morning air, toward the lake. The streets were empty, the city still sleeping, the snow muffling every sound. When they reached the lakefront, Cale stopped and turned to face Ryan. The stone I gave you. Use it. When doubt comes. When fear arises. When the old programming tries to convince you that you are small and broken and separate, hold the stone. And remember the experience I showed you. Remember that you are infinite consciousness temporarily focused through the lens of Ryan Bill. Remember that the cross is not about your unworthiness, but about your true nature. I will, Ryan said, his voice thick with emotion. Cale reached out and placed both hands on Ryan's shoulders. You are not alone in this work. There are thousands of others waking up. Thousands of others remember. Thousands of others who have been contacted, who have been shown the truth, who are choosing to live from it. Find them. Connect with them. Support each other. Because the awakening is not individual. It is collective. And it requires community. How do I find them? They will find you. When you speak your truth, when you share your experience, the ones who are ready will recognize it. They will reach out. And together, you will create something new. Not a religion. Not an institution. But a living network of awakened consciousness. A web of light spreading across your planet. That is what is needed now. That is what will shift the timeline. The light in the sky began to descend, moving toward the lake, and Ryan saw it clearly now. Not a craft in the traditional sense, but a sphere of light, pulsing with colors that didn't exist in the normal spectrum. I have to go, Cale said. But remember, Ryan Bill, you are not broken. You are not sinful. You are not separate. You are consciousness itself, temporarily experiencing limitations in order to know itself more fully. And the cross you wear is a reminder of that truth. Wear it with understanding now. Wear it as a symbol of your divinity, not your unworthiness. And then Cale walked toward the lake, toward the light, and Ryan watched as he dissolved into luminescence, as the sphere rose slowly, silently, into the morning sky. Ryan stood there until the light disappeared, until he was alone on the lakefront, the sun rising over the water, the city beginning to wake. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the stone Cale had given him. It pulsed in his palm, warm and alive. And he felt it. The connection, the presence, the truth. He was not Ryan Bill. Ryan Bill was something he was experiencing. But he, the awareness experiencing Ryan Bill, was consciousness itself. Infinite, eternal, divine. And the cross was not a symbol of his brokenness. It was a blueprint of his true nature. Consciousness descending into matter, experiencing limitations, and then rising again, transformed, awakened, whole. Ryan walked back to his apartment, and everything looked different. The buildings he'd spent his career designing were not just structures. They were consciousness expressing itself in form. The people beginning to emerge onto the streets were not just individuals. They were infinite awareness temporarily focused through human lenses. The city itself was not just concrete and steel. It was consciousness dancing with itself, creating the experience of separation in order to know itself through relationship. Everything was alive. Everything was conscious. Everything was divine. And he had been walking through it blind for 36 years. But now he could see. Now he remembered. Now he understood what the cross actually meant. And he would spend the rest of his life helping others see it too. Subscribe if you're beginning to see the truth beneath the symbols. Because what Ryan discovered about living from this understanding will transform how you see everything. Ryan didn't go to work that day. He called in sick, which wasn't entirely a lie. He was sick. Sick with understanding. Sick with the weight of truth. Sick with the knowledge that everything he'd been taught was incomplete at best, deliberately distorted at worst. He sat at his kitchen table with his laptop, the stone Kyle had given him resting beside the keyboard, and he began to write. Not planning what to say, just letting the words flow. My name is Ryan Bill. I'm an architect in Chicago. 4 days ago, I found a stranger freezing to death on my street. I brought him inside, and he told me he was from another world. He told me things about the cross, about Jesus, about the nature of consciousness that shattered everything I was taught in 36 years of Catholic education. And I believe him. Not because I'm gullible, not because I'm having a breakdown, but because what he showed me makes more sense than anything the church ever taught me. He wrote for 6 hours, pouring out everything. The encounter, the teachings, the experience of his true nature, the understanding that the cross was not about sin and sacrifice but about transformation and awakening. When he finished, he had 23 pages. He read through it, expecting it to sound insane, but it didn't. It sounded true. It sounded like something people needed to hear. He thought about posting it online, but something stopped him. This wasn't meant to be anonymous. This wasn't meant to be hidden. If he was going to share this, he needed to own it. He needed to attach his name, his face, his credibility to it, even if it cost him everything. Ryan created a blog. Simple design, clean architecture, nothing flashy. Just a white page with black text and a title. The real meaning of the cross. What an extraterrestrial taught me about Jesus. He posted his story. And then he shared the link on his personal Facebook page, his LinkedIn, his Instagram, places where his colleagues would see it, where his family would see it, where everyone who knew him as a rational, successful architect would see him claiming he'd sheltered an alien who'd revealed the true meaning of Christianity. His finger hovered over the post button for a full minute. This would change everything. His career, his reputation, his relationships. People would think he'd lost his mind. But Cale's words echoed in his memory. When you speak your truth, when you share your experience, the ones who are ready will recognize it. Ryan hit post. And then he closed his laptop and waited. The responses started within an hour. His colleague Mark. Dude, are you okay? Do you need to talk to someone? His cousin Jennifer. Ryan, this is concerning. Have you been under a lot of stress? His ex-wife Melissa. I always knew you were searching for something. I hope you found it. But then other responses started coming. A woman named Sarah. I had a similar experience 3 years ago. I've never told anyone because I thought I was crazy. Thank you for being brave enough to share this. A man named David. Everything you wrote resonates with something I've felt my whole life but couldn't articulate. The church never made sense to me, but this does. A teenager named Alex. I've been having dreams about beings teaching me about consciousness since I was little. My parents think I'm making it up, but I'm not. And reading your story makes me feel less alone. By the end of the day, Ryan had received over 200 messages. Half of them were concerned for his mental health. Half of them thanked him for speaking a truth they'd been feeling but couldn't express. He responded to every single one. To the concerned ones, he said, I understand why this sounds crazy. It sounds crazy to me too. But I know what I experienced. And I don't know it. To the grateful ones, he said, you're not alone. There are more of us than you think. And we're waking up. Over the next week, the blog post went viral. Not mainstream viral, but viral within certain communities. Spiritual seekers, UFO researchers, people who'd had their own contact experiences, people who'd left organized religion but still felt a pull towards something transcendent. Ryan started receiving interview requests, podcasts, YouTube channels, online forums. He said yes to all of them, not because he wanted attention, but because Cale had been right. The ones who needed to hear this were finding him, and he had a responsibility to share what he'd learned. His first interview was with a podcast called Beyond the Veil, hosted by a woman named Rachel who'd had her own contact experience. They talked for 3 hours, and Ryan shared everything. The encounter, the teachings about the cross, the experience of his true nature, The understanding that consciousness is eternal and death is transformation. When the episode was released, it was downloaded 50,000 times in the first week. The comment section was flooded with people sharing their own experiences, their own awakenings, their own understanding that the religious narratives they'd been taught were incomplete. Ryan's life changed completely. He quit his job at the architecture firm. Not dramatically. Not with a manifesto. He just realized he couldn't go back to designing buildings for clients who wanted impressive facades, while the interior structure was compromised. He couldn't go back to creating external structures when he was finally understanding the internal architecture of consciousness itself. He started offering what he called awakening sessions. Not therapy. Not coaching. Just conversations. People would reach out, and he'd talk with them, one-on-one, helping them understand what he'd learned. That they weren't broken. That they weren't sinful. That they weren't separate from the divine. That the cross was not a symbol of their unworthiness but a blueprint of their true nature. Some people got it immediately. Some people needed time. Some people rejected it entirely, clinging to the familiar narratives even though those narratives had never brought them peace. Ryan didn't try to convince anyone. He just shared what he knew, and trusted that the ones who were ready would hear it. 3 months after Cale left, Ryan received a message that changed everything. It was from a woman named Claire in Boulder. "I've been following your work. I had a contact experience 2 years ago, and I've been trying to create space for others to share their experiences. I'm organizing a gathering. 50 people who've had contact, who are waking up, who want to support each other through this process. Would you be willing to speak?" Ryan said yes. The gathering was in a community center in Boulder, and when Ryan walked in, he felt it immediately. The frequency. The room was full of people who'd woken up, who'd had their own experiences, who'd been shown their own truths, and they recognized each other. Not through words, but through presence, through the vibration of consciousness that had remembered itself. Ryan spoke for an hour, sharing his story, sharing what Cale had taught him, sharing the understanding that the cross was not about suffering but about transformation. When he finished, the room was silent. Not an uncomfortable silence, a reverent one. The silence of people recognizing truth. And then a man stood up. He was probably in his 60s, gray hair, kind eyes, wearing a simple cross around his neck. "I was a priest for 40 years, he said, his voice shaking. "I left the church 3 years ago because I couldn't keep teaching things I didn't believe. But I never stopped believing in Jesus. I just stopped believing in what the church said about Jesus. And what you just shared, that's what I've been feeling. That's what I've been trying to understand." Jesus wasn't teaching religion. He was teaching consciousness. He was showing us who we really are. And the cross is the map. The man sat down, tears streaming down his face, and Ryan felt something shift in the room. This wasn't just his awakening. This was collective. This was the beginning of something larger. After the gathering, dozens of people approached Ryan, thanking him, hugging him, sharing their own stories. A woman who'd been visited after praying for healing from cancer. A man who'd seen a craft while hiking and received a telepathic message about humanity's potential. A teenager who'd been having dreams about beings teaching her about consciousness since she was 5. Story after story. Each one unique, but all of them pointing toward the same truth. We are not alone. Consciousness is eternal. The universe is responsive. And humanity is waking up. Ryan drove back to Chicago that night, and as he crossed into the city, he saw it differently. Not just buildings and streets and people, but consciousness expresses itself. The infinite experiencing itself through the finite. The divine dancing with itself in form. And he understood. This was what Jesus had been trying to show. This was what the cross represented. Not sacrifice to appease an angry God. But consciousness chooses to experience limitations in order to know itself more fully. And then transcending that limitation. Rising. Transforming. Awakening. The resurrection wasn't just a historical event. It was a process. A pattern. A blueprint. And every human being was living it. Descending into matter. Forgetting who they are. Suffering. And then waking up. Remembering. Rising. Transformed. Ryan pulled into his parking spot and sat in the car for a long moment, holding the stone Cale had given him, feeling its pulse, feeling the connection to something vast and loving. And he sent out a silent thank you. To Cale, who'd answered a prayer Ryan hadn't even known he was praying, to his grandmother, whose love had never ended, to Jesus, who'd tried to show humanity the truth 2,000 years ago, to every being, human and non-human, who was working to help humanity wake up. The cross around his neck felt different now, not heavy with guilt, but light with understanding. It wasn't a reminder of his brokenness. It was a reminder of his true nature, infinite consciousness, temporarily experiencing limitation, and then rising again, transformed, awakened, whole. Ryan Bill, architect, had finally learned to read the blueprint, and he would spend the rest of his life helping others read it too. Subscribe if you're ready to see the cross with new eyes. Because what happened next will show you exactly what it looks like when this understanding goes viral.